Today, we're reacting to the most popular posts in the Reddit homeschool community.
There's a lot of stuff here. There are everything from questions to advice to
memes.
To memes to horror stories to success stories. So we're just gonna check it out and see what we find. Public service announcement, use the public school grade. When it comes to signing your children up for activities, camps, or lessons, just go by the grade your child would be if they attended public school. For kids, it can be embarrassing or isolating for them to not know what grade they're in when other kids ask. This is just a social construct. Just teach them their grade in order to help their social skills. I actually agree with this. It's just basically they're asking you your age.
Yeah.
For those who don't homeschool, that's a very popular question for adults to ask kids. It's oh, what grade are you in? And then for those who are homeschooling, it's oh, well, I'm doing this 8th grade math curriculum.
Yeah.
And then it's stumbling around. So I do agree with that. I think it's probably just for kids to know, hey, if adults ask you this, you can say that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, especially for the homeschool norm. I think it's just oh, my grade 7th grade or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a lot easier for just those passing by comments, and so you don't have to go on a whole blabber speech about I do this curriculum, and then I do this thing, and that doesn't really have a grade for it.
I'm a 22-year-old man. I was homeschooled. Horror story, kind of a rant/warning. Oh boy.
Oh boy, okay.
A warning to all parents considering homeschooling your kids. Please actually school them. Don't just turn them loose and hope they'll figure it out. My parents did not teach me anything. They didn't test me. I don't know how many continents there are. I can't tell you where states are located. I'm severely undereducated and it bothers me. He also added an edit. Already getting a lot of downvotes, haha. I would just like to add, I'm not anti-homeschool. I'm just anti-ignoring your kids' educational needs. So I think that this is a very important point to make, which is that homeschool is really just a legal term at this point. It says nothing about what you do on a day-to-day basis for your education. It basically means I do something different than public school. And that's the extent to what it means. And so I find it funny that there are homeschool stereotypes, because you can't stereotype homeschoolers other than they kind of have to be extreme in one way or another. For us, we were just extremely interested in education.
Right.
But then for other people, it might be, I'm extremely concerned for my child's health. That could also mean that your child has extreme health needs, right? There's just a wide spectrum of the reasons why you would actually homeschool. There's definitely concerns with kids who are neglected and don't get adequate education through homeschooling. And I think that is a legitimate concern. And that's something that I think can also come, as a parent, it's already hard being a parent. And then if all of that responsibility is on you for your child's education, it can be very hard if you don't, because you have to create your own structure in terms of learning. But I would say that, obviously kids and students need support. Sometimes when we mention WEquil school as a self-directed model, people interpret that as, oh, kids just learn by themselves. How do they do that? No, there's a lot that goes into that in terms of we're trying to get them to a self-directed point where they are responsible, curious, motivated, and have the support so they can learn independently and drive their own education in their lives.
We also say learn through experiences and learn through things that are relevant to them.
Yeah.
And that's also showing them how all of these things, the human body, continents and history, are all relevant to them.
Right.
That gets them interested in it.
All right. This one is a funny meme. It says,
oh boy,
if you homeschool your kids, then they won't fit in with society. And then the guy's just correct. I feel like this is a concern that a lot of people have in a selling point that some homeschool parents talk about is I don't want my kid to be the average person because society's falling apart and the average person isn't able to have a constructive conversation, and it seems like fitting in with the cultural norm.
Isn't exactly the best option.
And in some cases, you could look at that and be like, maybe I don't want that for my kids. And I do agree that it's like, this is a great opportunity for you to do better. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to public school, a lot of it is like limiting the downside, but in the process, you're also kind of limiting the upside for kids, right? And with homeschooling, because you have so much freedom, there really is no cap in terms of the upside if you have the right resources and support.
Yeah. So there's also no cap for the downside. Though.
That's true. So that's the concern there, right? But I think that it is kind of funny to think about, like, okay, yeah, maybe I don't want to be like, quote unquote normal. But then there's also like, okay, what does normal actually mean, and what are the benefits of quote unquote normal? Because there is some concerns of like, oh, I want to be able to relate to people. But then there's also like, okay, if you're just a quote-unquote normal person, that could also mean that you're highly replaceable. Whereas if you do have unique experiences as a person, you have more of what Naval talks about as like specific knowledge.
There's like fitting into the cultural norm, as in like you are actually not able to have a good conversation. And then there's also fitting into the cultural norm, as in you can learn how to talk to people that might be acting like that and with different interests, and you can learn how to engage with all sorts of different people. Yeah. Normal or not.
Well, one person commented, society doesn't even fit in with itself anymore. Everything is so divided these days and hostile. The next one, this has no point. It's just funny. Parents across the country, our children will be home from school for weeks. Whatever shall we do? Homeschool parents, welcome to the jungle. Yeah, that has no point. First they say, my kids are smart. Next they say they are well-spoken and friendly. Then I tell them we homeschool. But what about socialization? The purpose of socialization is becoming much more broader for kids. Mm-hmm. Like, in school, you are learning how to socialize with people who are all in your same zip code, all your same age. Right?
All your same age, learning
all the same things. When it's like, okay, what does socialization actually mean? In this context, I think it should mean that you're able to engage with people of all sorts of different backgrounds, like
and
whether they're older or younger than you, from different countries. Maybe English is their second language. Like, there's all these things.
You call always being in this group of 30 kids, same age, learning the same things in the same area, all of that, probably around, like, same of, income, households, and all of that. You call that socialization? I mean, that is socialized to a certain extent, and it's better than being trapped in your house all day. Mm-hmm. But you also, with homeschooling, have the great opportunity to expose them to all sorts of different people, all sorts of different cultures and backgrounds, and this very wide variety of people. And then they can learn from them as well. And there's just so much that comes with that.
Yeah, it does really teach you how to intentionally build relationships, because you're not forced to build relationships, and if in many cases as a homeschooler, but you have a lot of opportunity to learn how to build that skill intentionally, which is what we increasingly have to do as like more people are working virtually, more people are doing entrepreneurship in an environment where it's not like, oh, now you're stuck with these coworkers, so like you're going to build a relationship with them. And increasingly, like, even if you do, people are also changing jobs more and more often, so you don't necessarily have a consistent community and peer group, which can be difficult. So that is a very important skill. You are building that skill of how to engage with especially adults. I think that's what a lot of kids are lacking in public school. It's like you have one teacher, but they're like trying to manage all the other kids. Like, you're not really getting a lot of exposure to operating with adults in a personal or professional setting. Like, it isn't a normal environment with a teacher to student dynamic. Former homeschooler here, hope you won't mind me sharing some thoughts that I've had recently. In the past, I've disagreed with people who have advocated for abolishing or increasing regulation on homeschooling. I understand that some homeschoolers unfortunately fall through the cracks and experience educational neglect. However, having worked in reading intervention in public schools, I think people massively underestimate how many kids are falling through the cracks in public schools. As homeschooling is getting increasingly popular, I'm seeing parents become increasingly laissez-faire in their educational approach. Truisms such as homeschoolers only need to study a few hours in the day have seemed to morph into some families spending hardly any time on actual schooling. Here would be my unsolicited advice for homeschoolers. Homeschooling your kids should be a full-time job. If you already have a full-time job, you do not have the time to do this properly unless you are able to hire someone to do a lot of it. So I think that this really depends on where the kid's at. And initially, when we were younger, our parents were very engaged with us. And there was also very certain expectations of you're going to present what you've learned every week to us so we can see what you've learned for your education, right? There was that accountability there. And because of that, it was something that we were able to do very independently. And we got to a point of self-direction and curiosity. And I think that it really just depends on how far along the kid is and if they're able to do that by themselves largely versus constantly hovering over their shoulder. And I think that that's really the difference between, if you have a curriculum, test grades based model, oftentimes students are not motivated. And in that case, yes, you have to hover over them
You have
constantly.
to be breathing down their neck, and you've got to be putting their pen to paper and always, right?
You need to have strong boundaries and a healthy, authoritative relationship with your kids for this to work. I agree that the relationship between parents and kids is something that's very important if you're homeschooling. I also think that this is still very much kind of based in.
This is assuming that they're using the grades and tests model,
right? Yeah, if that's the case, and you basically are recreating the school environment in your home, in which case you need to be like the teacher and set those standards. And I do think that you need to have a relationship where you can be the parent, right?
Yeah.
You're your parent.
I've
you
met
still
some
need to
kids
parent,
who kind
right?
of parent their parents, and
that can be difficult because you do there's definitely give your kids freedom, but there still needs to be certain expectations, and if they don't meet those expectations, you are the only one who can step in. I agree with parts of that. I don't think that recreating public school at home is really the ideal way that the opportunity of homeschooling can be taken advantage of.
A growing amount of homeschoolers are doing is just so far apart from that, where their kids are motivated to learn, they're inspired, and they're having project ideas, and they are doing real things and creating real value.
And taking care of basic academics, like getting really high SAT scores earlier than they would normally be doing, because they're motivated and they also are taking ownership of their education.
All of that is just totally not relevant to some of these like that comment about being oh, you need to have an authoritative position.
Right.
You need to have to make them do their work because nothing else will motivate them to do it other than fear.
Right.
Or something like that. And it's in that scenario, yes, I completely agree.
Right.
But that's not the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is that your kids are motivated and they're doing real things, novel and useful projects.
Yeah. And they also respect you as a parent because they're curious and they're trying to learn from everyone, including their parents. Well, I'm going to skip to the fourth one.
All right.
It is healthy for your kids to receive negative feedback from other adults. It is healthy for them to dislike or even hate some of their teachers. It is probably healthy for you to occasionally get some pushback on how you parent your kids. Don't pull them out of school just to avoid this. If you homeschool, you need to let your kids experience this somewhere else, for example, in a sport or job. I definitely agree that kids need to get negative feedback from adults. And I do think that there is a risk of, if you're homeschooling, that they don't receive pushback and they don't have to endure like, for example, just working or being around somebody who's difficult,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, well, I also think that there is so much more freedom with homeschooling that allows you to help your kids take advantage of those experiences as how can I help this person? How can I collaborate with them? You know,
Yeah.
how can I, because when it comes to in public school, if you're next to a kid that's annoying, like, you learn how to tolerate them, but there's not much opportunity for you to use that as a way for, like, how can I, listen to this person and try to figure out, like, what's going on. Do they feel do they just feel neglected by other people? What are they struggling with that's causing them to act that way? Like, there's not much opportunity for you to really dive in deeper and use that as an opportunity, whereas with homeschooling, I think there is a lot more opportunity for that, but it also requires parents to also be willing to deal with those difficult people and help their kids to deal with those difficult people, because it's not going to be easy for the parents either, but that it is an important experience. Anxiety flourishes when kids are allowed to avoid things that make them anxious. The answer to anxiety at school is not pulling kids out, it's therapy, problem solving, and resiliency building. I completely agree that the answer to anxiety is not hiding from whatever it is that's making you anxious. When it comes to if they're feeling anxious at public school, like, maybe there's other things going on, like, who knows? But I would say that definitely the answer to social anxiety is not let's shield them from social experiences. It's about facing those experiences so you can face them and realize, like, I didn't die, maybe I felt anxious, maybe it wasn't like, maybe I didn't feel too great, but it wasn't something that was that harmed me in any way.
Well, I think that the anxiety can come from all sorts of different places, in public school or not, in homeschool or not.
Yeah.
And if it's in the real world, then it's not something you should be wanting to hide them from. They need to learn to cope with that and to dive deeper and to see what the actual problem is.
All right, well, this was really fun. We'll probably have to do another one of these because there's a lot to cover. And there is, again, you can't stereotype homeschoolers. There's such a wide spectrum of things to talk about. So, yeah.